Well, thank you for coming along, Connor. Let's start our conversation with just introduce yourself and what you do, buddy.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. So, my name is Connor McManus. Don't really know how to define myself at the moment. I get asked this quite a lot, and I'm not sure what I am. But my stories, I spent the past 9 years in early stage business, from being involved in really cool startups over in Sydney in Australia, all the way to having my own startup, which I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about today, and then what I do now is I work on behalf of the West Midlands Combined Authority, their investment readiness program, working with early stage business owners, helping to commercialize what they've got going on at the moment and turn that into hopefully exciting, backable projects.
Yeah, fantastic. And when we first met, if we go back to when you and I first met a long time ago, um, you were right at the start of your journey building a thing called collective fitness. So what I wanted to dig into was, why you made that decision to jump into being a founder. And what collective fitness was. How did you spot the gap in the market? Why did you go after it? Why did you make that mad decision? That's my question.
I get it. I get it. I'll try and give you the timeline of the run up until when we first met. So I moved. I was lucky enough to move to Australia in 2016, I think it was, and then did the usual thing, messed around, got drunk, had fun for the first six
Did
to
you
nine
your
months.
bongs, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I was being young. I was being young. Um, but then, so I come from the health and fitness world. I spent all my life from when I was 16 up until when I went as a personal trainer. So I've never really been employed. So I understood what being self-employed was. And I got given an opportunity to go and work for a business called F45. And so F45 is now, there's I think there's a couple in Birmingham. They're a globally publicly traded health and fitness business
Yeah.
where they're essentially these small little franchise models which you can open up in a small space and run these group training sessions out of. And it's a very replicable model. I was employee number 19, 20, 21, something like that. I was the first
Perfect.
batch of people. And I used to sit next to the guy who was trying to sell the franchises. And it was like what you see on the TV series, where like he's picking up the phone, people are slamming the phone on him, and he's just disheartened. But then all of a sudden, one day, the tides just switched, and then like it was a nightmare sitting next to him because his phone never stopped ringing, and he was always selling, always dotting around, and it was just crazy how things switched. And anyway, I got to be part of that journey, and I got to see it, and that was where I was like, okay. I like startups. I'm addicted. They're for me. I left that company, got headhunted by another while I was in Australia. Tried to stay in Sydney in Australia, and then, but unfortunately, I had to come back. I got kicked out. Couldn't get myself a permanent visa, so I came
They're
back
not
to
met you. You were delight. They missed out there. Talent.
no, I know. And the thing is, because it's demand and supply, so I think there was health and fitness is rife over there, so I just wasn't needed essentially. But when I came back to the UK, I was like, well, if I can't start a business over there, and now I'm addicted to startups, I'm going to do something here and start a business. I'm going to try and turn this negative situation, because I was really sad coming back, and turn it into a positive. One of the things that I identified when I was in Australia is they have a very different approach to health than we do. They view our health very holistically. And so they understand that physical health affects our mental health, and our mental health affects our physical health. And we don't just look at exercise, we look at exercise and nutrition and rehabilitation and everything in between. They view it holistically. But we didn't do that here at the time. Obviously, COVID has now accelerated that. And so what I went back into personal training when I came back to the UK just to get some money in. And what I realized was people were approaching me with their personal training problems, but I realized it was bordering into the remit of mental health or bordering into the remit of nutrition and physiotherapy and so on. And so I
Interesting.
was like, okay, like I need to get support from a physio here and a support from a nutrition. It wasn't really done that much here in the UK, and it took a while to convince a few people to work with me. And we ended up sharing clients. And like if I couldn't support somebody, I'd pass them to the nutritionist, and it happened vice versa. But it was really good. It started to work really, really well. And so then I was like, okay, there's an opportunity here to try and turn what we're doing here
The
into
packaging.
and package it into an app and turn it into a health and fitness app. And that was Collective Fitness. That was that business. Ultimately, COVID ruined
I was
it.
going to say what because collective fitness was about the time that I met you, and we met say 2020, 2021, and so many people just got complete. If you had a physical business, if you had something where you had to be with people, you were just sideswiped horribly. And I think that's around the time we met.
Exactly. So I started that right at the start of 2019, and then I ran it up until the end of 2020. Things started going pear-shaped as soon as COVID kicked off, and I tried to, muscle it through for another like 9 months or so, but it ended up just not working. Or like we built it around going to the gym initially with
Yeah.
the, and obviously that was in hindsight that was a
Nobody's
terrible.
going to the gym anymore.
Exactly. It was a terrible decision, right? And we tried to adapt. We ran out of money. And there was, even without COVID, it probably would have failed because, like, naive, younger founder me underestimated the resources it required to commercialize a consumer facing app. Like, thinking about it now, there's so many, like, I can blame COVID, but there were so many other mistakes in there.
That little moment that you've just touched there, that is such a huge. I mean, that problem, it's not just naive young you, right? That applies to. I used to have people coming in. I'd look at IP for a large bank way back when, and people would come in and say, "We're going to develop this credit card business," right? And you'd look at their forecast, and you'd be like, "Where's the marketing budget? It costs £100 to sell every credit card you sell. Where's the £100 is?" And they never bake them in. I think so many founders that are doing a direct to consumer application don't do that maths of it's never no pounds, right?
Yeah,
It's
100%.
not no pounds. So how many pounds is it per person and where are you going to get that from? Even if that to begin with is your time, that still adds up as pounds, right? You can still value your own time. I think that's a really good insight that I didn't want to lose as we're just flowing along. Now, there was a huge, I remember there was a huge boom of people going, I'm a personal trainer. I've got to take what I used to do in a room in a gym and put it on Zoom and get people to come and to do what we were doing on some kind of video application. There was a big boom of that, right? And that was kind of the time we met. So what happened after collective fitness? What was the journey from that COVID kicking into the next thing for you?
Well, we had a lot of customers. We worked out that like there was something there, and we had a lot of
Yeah,
customers who were
sure.
really enjoying what we were doing. We just couldn't. We ultimately just ran out of money because of different reasons, which is, it's just an interesting tidbit in itself. We can zoom in on in a little bit, but one like a couple of people approached us and was like, "Hey, like we really like you doing. We're members on the app, and like this thing has just happened to my business or my team, and we've got nothing in place to support our employees. I think this would be good for our employees. Is there anything we can do here?" And like we try to kind of square peg round hole it, but we just the app was set up for consumers and not for organizations.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, okay, there could be something here. And then in swoops Joth.
That was another MVP on the journey because you got some money from Seeders, right? That was a big kick for you guys and got another MVP out there. And you raised again after that, off the back of that. Is that right?
Yeah, so essentially what happened is, we couldn't afford to revamp the product, and so we got put into review. You got the grant, we got the grant from Cedars. We used that to build our first MVP and no code MVP, and to ultimately some of these people that we were talking to onboard them onto it, test the model, making sure like what we think was going to happen from the value to the customer perspective was actually going to happen, and then make sure that we could actually make money off it at the same time as well. And then once we realized a few of these things, like we hit the ceiling of the no code MVP. And
Yeah.
then that's when we took all of this and we went to VCs and investors. And I think we raised 125K. And then like we rebranded it now. So now it was no longer Collective Fitness at this point. It was Human OS. It was a completely new company. We rebranded it, took it to investors, raised us 125K. And then we used that money to ultimately build the first fully code version of the platform.
I want to dig into that actually because I think that's fascinating, right? I mean, that's the thesis that we have with SuperTech is you get people live and then you prove an idea on its merit. You prove the idea on its merit, you prove the person on its merit. I literally just had somebody that we've agreed to invest in last week in this morning. And we were looking at like what that MVP is going to be, what it's going to do. And one of the questions that he had was, should I charge customers? Right. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely charge customers because you've got to prove like you can't prove an idea has merit if nobody will pay for it, right? That's the point. It's like there's a pain there, it needs resolving. People are willing to pay money to resolve the pain. So that's kind of what that product has to be. And so I guess you did that traditional thing of getting a product into people's hands, proving that someone wants it, and then going to investors and saying, look, it's a business model. We just need to scale this now, right?
Exactly, and to that point, right? Like it was at this point I approached my now co-founder and showed her the platform, and she was like, "What? People are spending money on this? Like, what? This can't be real. Like, you are lying to me." And it wasn't that; it was just there was a thing we were trying to test, and it was that can this bring value to the end user, and are people willing like forget about the back end platform, the front facing part of the business was nice and clean and sexy still, and were people willing to invest in that? And that was what we were trying to test, right? Value to the customer, are the businesses willing to pay for it? Because we had that B2B2C model, so we could separate those two goals.
Yeah.
um, and that was a fortunate advantage to that, where like the decision maker wasn't seeing the back end platform. But it allowed us to, and like to on your point, right? You've got to, that's being able to separate what you're trying to test. Yes, we want to get feedback from the customer so that we can iterate on the product and really, get the product market fit. But we also want to make sure that people are going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can do both of those things at the same time. Sometimes you can't, and it's about
Yeah.
identifying what scenario you live in.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting that thing of like, and we'll come back to this, I think, in this conversation, but a lot of tech founders and software founders miss the point that they can use themselves, they can consult, they can be part of the product and the service
Yeah.
during its growth model. The technology is partly about delivering value and it's partly about efficiency, right? And you can prove somebody wants what you're selling with any form of service and then iterate to something that's efficient and scalable. You don't have to be end state day one. It's interesting. I was talking to a very, very senior investment entity, one of the largest in the world, last week. And we co-invested, I'm invested in the same startup as them. It has to be said, far, far smaller ticket size and they're screaming at the founders to get the product out to market. They're getting very, very frustrated because I'm kind of on the founder side. I don't think that product's ready in its kind of MVP state, but I can totally see their point of view. They see that as bad founder behavior, kind of hiding from the customers. Get something out there, whatever it is, so you can start learning and trading. So I think that, and you're kind of a proof of that, which is MVP was a bit kind of wonky, but it proved people wanted what you were selling enough to get the investors on board to build scalable version, right?
Exactly. And I think, like, just to zoom into that a little bit, I think if I was to do it again, the lesson to myself would be like, just when we build out these projects, right, we have like six, seven, eight, nine pain points we're trying to solve. Zoom in on one or two, but then also get the design right. I underestimated how important design is. And, it can only, as long as it does one or two things really well, that's all that matters. Then from that first impressions, how it looks, font, white space, button size, all those little details. That's something that I've learned is incredibly important because you can get away with it then if the design's beautiful and it does the one or two pain points really well.
I agree with that massively. There was a big learning in labs when we were growing the labs process. Originally, we would take things into like the first test with our customers, which were the founders, and it would be completely functional but fairly ugly. And they also know it's rubbish, right? And then so we flipped that to like having the design right first, which is technically speaking, every project manager on earth will tell you this is the wrong way around. But having the design right and getting the rest of the functions in behind that curve. And the feedback from the founders was like, "This is brilliant," really. So that phrase in restauranteering, the first bite is with the eye, is absolutely bang on for software. But
Exactly.
I don't want to miss that point that you just made, which is that we see so many founders feature creeping before they've even spoken to a customer, right? You've got the core problem that you're solving. You build the thing to solve the core problem, but you're nervous that that's not enough. So you throw a bunch of other stuff in as well. And it's like, no, if your solution to their problem is good enough, they're not going to care about the extra features. So keep it simple.
And that's where I think ultimately like startups and business is it is about brains, but it's also about stomach. And like, you're not seeing the results that you thought you were going to see. And this is where like there's an art to it where you've just got to go, okay, I need to hold on a little bit and be you need to be impatient on the action, but then be patient on the results. And like whenever when you're the one saying I back this, and everybody around you is going, with the results and the data don't say that, you've got to have the stomach to stand in it. And I think that's sometimes where a lot of businesses fail, and that's ultimately where, saying it as it is, there's a lot of luck to it. Where like in that moment and going, yeah, I'm going to be patient with the results, there is also the exact same scenario where you go, I'm going to be patient with the results, but actually you should have just listened to the data. And that's where it is really tricky to get a startup mobilized and off the ground, especially in this MVP stage.
Yeah, that guts and grit thing, that thing of like, I mean, if you read the lean
Mm.
startup, the first bit of it is about like sort of the MVP, build, measure, learn journey. But everybody always kind of they kind of give up on the book after chapter three, I feel, because they don't that measure learn bit, that thing of like we should be getting data, we should be testing like scientists, gets lost. But the problem is you're always racing towards instead of thinking like a scientist, your gut reaction is to go and do the easy thing, like, well, maybe there's money over there if I go chasing over there. Whereas you probably get to the end of the journey quicker if you had the patience to grind out that, oh, we got one today, we get two tomorrow, we get three the day after. And actually, if you've convinced two people to buy your thing, that's way better than that's the start of the journey to 20,000 people, right? That's the
Yeah.
thing, I guess.
And that's
Um,
the Airbnb quote, isn't it? Like, is it Brian Chesky? I always forget his surname, but he said you'd rather have like 100 people love your product than a million people kind of be like, man, yeah, it's all right. Like you want the 100 who love it, and then you can expand outwards.
yeah, you're already on the right journey. Um, Human OS, it's grown, it's now iterating and pivoting again. It's on that kind of startup journey to find its market and start to scale, right? So you have now started using the things that you've learned and you're out mentoring, running programs for founders, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Humanist is still going in the background. On one of the directors, just no longer involved in the day to day. What like just to kind of give a snapshot of that journey, we raised that first round that I just mentioned in the April. We used that money to build the product, got it out to market, started getting customers. We raised another little bit of money to continue that journey about 9 months later. So we raised 250K in total. And then ultimately, though, like we were doing that thing that we were just mentioning. That's why I wanted to zoom in on this, where we were focusing too much on the features and not enough on the customer. And like ultimately, we were focusing on the supply side of the business rather than the demand side of the business,
Yeah.
where we should have been focused on the demand side and being okay that things were a little bit broken and just fixing them as we go along, like the whole we fix a spaceship while it's in air analogy.
Yeah.
Um, and so that
Apollo.
was the mistake that we ultimately made. Then we got to this place where we were like, we've got a really healthy pipeline, we've got the product really comfortable now, but we're low on cash. That's the problem. And then, as lo and behold, that pipeline started to drop away. And we were like, oh, okay, crap. And then so that's when we took a step back, stripped a lot of the costs out of the business, and led into what we were talking about a few moments ago about like we did more of the consultancy, more of the actual human to human element that you can do as the business to help then re-energize the business. And at this point, because I was overseeing a lot of the product stuff, I was like, do you know what? Like, I'll take a step back, remove me from the business.
That's my
Say,
salary for now.
yeah, don't need my salary and whatnot. And like obviously I still support the business in a roundabout way. And now it's kind of regaining momentum. And we pivoted a few times, and ultimately what the lesson is here is not every business needs to be this like capital intensive VC backable business. It can actually be driven by cash flow and just be a little bit slower, but you get the
Yep.
profit. So the profit's good, right? And I'm like, I I think the lifestyle business terminology gets a bit of a bad name, but I do a business because I want to have a great lifestyle, right? And so I think it's also important to remember. But yeah, sorry, do you want to?
No, don't worry. I was going to just jump in and say I think there's an important point there, right? Which is that we know we I think the first portfolio we had through the SuperTech program had 30 founders. And we looked at our outcomes in terms of there's always the moonshot one, right? The one that's going to go inflect, go be huge, right? Out of that group. And this is what we had to build the maths of our investment products on. We're only going to get one moonshot out of that, but we're going to get maybe five of them that will grow to be SMEs and may sell at some point in 10 years' time. Their exit is going to be commensurate with the average UK business's sale, which is not tens of millions of pounds. It's like two. That's the kind of business that we might get out of this. But I mean, all of our program's been largely state backed, and so those SME businesses, probably call them lifestyle businesses, call them SMEs, but they are the backbone of the regional economy, right? So for our state backers, like that's the bit that they want to produce. They like that they pay taxes and they don't bugger off to Timbuktu, and they, those are the good ones, right? So the moonshot's kind of important because that's what all of the private investors are interested in. But those SMEs that are out there and iterating are the ones that are going to continue to drive growth here in the West Midlands. The other crazy number for me that I find fascinating is that we've got one moonshot, we've got five that are kind of SME size and doing whatever they're doing, and then we've got 15 that even after 2, 3 years are still out there pivoting, tinkering, iterating. There's only 9 full on failed, like given up, binned it, which for startups, early stage startups, is a crazy low number. Anyway, this isn't about us. This is about you. So I kind of wanted to pick up on that thing, that point about SMEs and smaller businesses being worthwhile. They absolutely are.
Yeah, and I think just to be devil's advocate to myself there, like it is also important to know when to go. Do you know what? I'm going to throw in the towel and go in. Like time is our most precious resource, right? And I think we might allude to this in a few moments' time about like just throwing in the towel. But I think it is also important to know that like of some of those people, there might actually be people out there that are like they're just refusing to fail,
Yeah.
whereas actually their time would be better spent pointed at something else.
Yeah, put it in bin and go do something else. Yeah, the first,
Yeah.
actually one of the first 9 has gone on to launch a very worthwhile program for startups in the West Midlands, which we will touch on in a moment.
We will, we will.
um, the what was I going to say? I think there's another thing which you brought up, which is recognizing you as a set of skills and an employee versus you as somebody that maybe started something on its journey and then, you know, you just don't fit anymore. So there's a huge strength in going, I'm sucking money out of this business and it doesn't need what I do right now. So I'm going to be a shareholder. Maybe I'll go be an NAD or an advisor to the business, whatever the governance structure is. But I'm going to get out the way because I think it will do better. And then when it's got a hole that looks like me, that's sometimes, when I can re-engage. I think that takes an enormous amount of personal strength to admit that, and an ego that's well managed.
Yeah. Egos have their pros and cons.
They do. So you are now running startup programs.
Yeah.
My traditional question is around, what your biggest. I suspect we've touched on these, but what your biggest one lesson that you are now giving to early stage founders is?
Yeah, so I backstory, I got support from some guys in the region when I was on my investment journey. When they realized I was stepping away, they were like, "Hey, you've actually got to walk this journey. Come and now pave this back to the entrepreneurial ecosystem." I was like, "Absolutely." And one like the job title is access to finance specialist, which is a random title, but
Let's see.
yeah, to your point, actually. One of like, if you just analyze why most businesses, starting from first principles, why do most businesses fail in early stage? It's because one day, unfortunately, you wake up and the bank balance says zero, can't afford to pay bills, got to wind the company down. That's what happens to, most companies. If you work backwards from there, you can find out why they run out of money, but that's ultimately always what it comes down to.
Mm.
So for me, and one lesson that I had when we were in a real tricky cash flow with the business is ultimately I just lasered in on my cash flow forecast and I managed us out of that scenario by, managing costs, working out when the bank balance was going to say zero and working backwards from there and generating the demand at the top of the funnel. Now, this is something that I do day in, day out with early stage business owners because if we can look at our forecast and accurately predict when we're going to run out of money, we can then work backwards from that and ultimately avoid the main disaster. Like, is that age old saying, like, if you tell me where I'm going to die and I'll never go there, like
Yeah,
that's what
I
a
love.
forecast does for your business. And I think it's so, and like, and when I say forecast, I don't just mean plug the numbers in and hope for the best. I mean work out what your business strategy is, how you're going to grow the business, how you're going to execute, and use that to inform how you create your forecast, and like show it to me in a way where like, okay, this is where people come in the top of the funnel. We spend this money here, which is the customer acquisition, it generates this, and we have this conversion rate, and it generates this bottom line revenue, which then carries over into the main P&L, etc., etc. And then you can look at that and you can go, okay, well, you've said here that your customer acquisition cost is X. And a little chat GPT tinkering over here tells me that at the moment in this sector, it's not that, it's Y. So if we update that, then all of a sudden you've gone from having this wonderful, profitable business model to it falls on its bum within 6 months and you run out of money.
Yeah.
And like I know that that's disheartening telling that to entrepreneurs, but you're going to want to know that so you can do something about it. And I had that exact scenario with somebody recently where we changed something because it wasn't accurate and her assumption was incorrect. And the business was going to die in like 4 or 5 months. And she was really disheartened. But there was something else that she'd been really conservative on. And so we made that realistic. And then the business was back to normal. But now we knew what was going to happen. And so we can adjust our strategy with that in mind.
It's interesting. I mean, my first COO, who used to oversee, we had a small business team, so she used to oversee our cash flow. She did the same thing. She was like, "This is when we're going to die. This is when we run out of money." But everything we do to put money into the top of the hopper is pushing that day back, right?
Mhm.
And so that was her attitude towards kind of sales was she started from if we don't do anything today, we burn out here. So this is our survive. This is how long we could survive with no sales. Right. What happens if we now get sales? And I always thought she's very much a pessimist as a human being. I always thought that was a bit downbeat. But what it meant was we were so laser focused on exactly that point on always keeping the. I sold that business for a lot of money, so it obviously worked. Um, Happy days. You are in the role that you're doing currently. You've now started to support the 51% Club, right? Which is Tara and that's backed by Midven have put some money into the top of that or are looking to support some of the people going through that. Do you just want to give a quick kind of what is that and what are you doing with those guys? And also, I think we can then bounce off that to kind of say, what do we need to do to keep creating a fairer system for startups, right? So I'll go. I'm sorry, that was like six questions, one question. I'm not a professional interviewer.
Exactly. So as I mentioned earlier, like my co-founder in Human OS was female, and so I'd like to see some of the not so nice things and the differences and how I got treated in a room versus how she got treated in a room, and there was loads of different scenarios like that. And so I've also had a great relationship from Tara, which I met through the program, through the Seeders program, and we've had a good relationship ever since. And when I stepped into this role, I think me and Tara like mutually approached each other and were like, hey, let's do something here. Let's put our heads together and create something that we can think will be actually really beneficial. So the program is an 8-week program. It's called the 8-week growth program. We touch on a different topic each week, but it's not just one of those where somebody comes in, we talk at you for an hour and you leave. Like there's homework, there's accountability, there's space to actually do work on the mornings that we spend together. And at the start of the program, we ask, what does success look like for you at the end of the program? And then we then adapt the program as we're going through to work people towards the goals at the end of the 8-week program. And so far, so good. We're about halfway through and it's working really, really well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, it is fantastic. I mean, I'm really impressed with where Tara's gone. I'm really impressed with where you've gone. And one of the things that is important with the startup ecosystem, I think, is that it becomes self kind of fulfilling. You people that have been startup founders like you have then gone on to create value for so many other startup founders. And I think, we're doing a better job as the UK of starting to recognize that having gone through all of those, having all those scars on your back is immensely valuable experience that can be repackaged and redelivered. Whereas previously, like if you had been through all those, it was like, well, we don't want to talk to you because things didn't go so well. But actually, things don't go so well for everybody, right?
Yeah.
Every single startup. There's nothing like an overnight success when you go and talk to the founders to find they've been at it for 10 years,
Yeah, and 100%. And I think in these scenarios, working with these particular groups of people, it's just always important to lean on data. And like it's so everybody has their opinion, right, on like how this different group have been treated. And what we just need to do is everybody take a step back and go, we humans, like, we make loads of errors. That's okay. Let's look at the data, and so we can really look at that to identify how we should spend our time and what we should focus on. And like, we did an exercise last week, or actually, again, we did forecasting. And so a known issue by looking at data in the female founder space is that they often go out to raise investment but don't really ask enough. And it's because maybe confidence issues and other different issues, and they're trying to make the likelihood of getting a no reduced. I get it. And so, but what we did is we go, well, let's build out this forecast. Let's do it in a way that we think is sensible. Let's do a conservative one. Let's do an optimistic one. And then once we've done that, we can effectively see, okay, we're now short 300K if we want to make this work. And so it doesn't become a conversation of how much should I raise. It's a conversation of, this is how much I need to raise to make this work. And then so then we're like outsourcing it to a framework or a data position that allows us to make the decision much better. And
Yeah.
so it removes that problem of human error, which we're obviously experiencing in different groups.
I think that point that you made as well about data driving kind of, there's a lot of opinion. There's a lot of data which disagrees, right? I think it was the former head of the BVCA that referred to any number related to the startup ecosystem as Theranos numbers, because he said they're all so unreliable and prone to kind of overinflation. Um, and I think you're absolutely right. Whether you're driving decisions as a founder or whether you're driving decisions as someone investing into the founder ecosystem, either creating programs or creating investment vehicles, whatever it is, you absolutely have to look at data that is relevant to the UK now, not trying to have a kind of opinion or a wish image of what you think it should be. Anyway, interesting. Listen, man,
Absolutely.
we have crossed over our timeline. We could talk literally, well, we do anyway, whenever we see each other.
Yeah, we do.
We could talk for ages. It's been such a pleasure to do this with you, and thank you for supporting us, and giving some time to this interview. Thank you very much, Connor. Have a very good day, and I will see you soon.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for having me. Take care.
No problem at all.